Snow crunched under my boots as I climbed the wooden stairs of the mountain lodge I built from scratch. The pine trees glittered with lights, my lights, and music echoed from inside. When I opened the door, I froze. There she was, my sister, Penda, standing in front of a roaring fireplace, holding a glass of wine and laughing with guests as they shouted, "To Penda, the proud owner of this beautiful lodge." My own photographs hung on the walls. My handmade furniture stood by the fire. And yet, not a single person knew the truth, that the woman they were celebrating had stolen everything from me. Zella had always carried a small dream in her heart, a place in the highlands of Tanzania where people could come, rest, and feel peace again. Every night after her long shifts in Nairobi, she would sit by the window and draw sketches of wooden cabins, tall pine trees, and warm fireplaces. It didn't look like much on paper, but to her, it was everything she wanted. A simple life surrounded by nature. She worked for years without a break. While others spent weekends with friends, she took extra shifts. She saved every coin, cut down on small joys, and told herself, one day, this will all make sense. When she finally had enough money, she bought a small piece of land high in the mountains, far from the noise of the city. Everyone thought she was crazy. Even her family laughed. Her sister Penda was the loudest one. She rolled her eyes and said, "Who wants to freeze in the mountains? You're wasting your money, Zella." But Zella didn't argue. She just smiled. She knew not everyone could see what she saw. The first few months were the hardest. The roads were rough, workers were slow, and sometimes the rain destroyed what she had just built. But Zella never gave up. She learned to mix cement, paint walls, and even made her own furniture from local wood. The villagers respected her quiet strength. They would say, "That city woman doesn't talk much, but she works like 10 men. When the lodge was finally ready, Zella cried quietly as she turned on the first light. The wooden cabins glowed softly under the night sky. The smell of fresh pine filled the air. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. She called it Kato Mountain Lodge, after her late father, who had always told her, "If you start something, finish it well." She invited her family for the opening. She hoped they would be proud, that they would see how far she had come. But nobody showed up. Her mother sent a short message saying she was busy, and Penda didn't even reply. For a moment, Zella felt a sting in her chest, a quiet ache that words couldn't fix. But that night, as the fireplace crackled and the mountain wind whispered through the windows, she looked around and smiled. Her dream was real now. She had built it with her own hands, her own faith, and her own strength. Even if no one else saw it, she knew what it meant. And that was enough. A few months before Christmas, the sky over the mountains was gray, and the roads were slippery from the heavy rain. Zella was driving her old pickup truck, filled with food supplies and decorations for the upcoming holiday season at the lodge. She was tired but happy, thinking about how beautiful the place would look with lights and laughter. The mountain curves were sharp, and as she turned one corner, her tires suddenly lost grip. The truck slid across the wet road, hit the guardrail, and spun into a shallow ditch. Everything went blurry. When Zella woke up, she was lying in a hospital bed. Her leg was wrapped in a cast, and her head throbbed. The nurse told her she was lucky to be alive. She had suffered a mild concussion and a broken leg, and she needed complete rest. The doctors said she wouldn't be able to walk properly for at least 2 months. For Zella, those words felt heavier than the pain. The lodge needed her. She was the one who managed bookings, ordered supplies, handled guests, and paid workers. Without her, everything could fall apart. Penda arrived at the hospital a day later, wearing her usual stylish clothes and carrying a small bag of fruit. She hugged Zella lightly and said, "You should have been more careful. But don't worry, I'll handle things at the lodge while you recover." Zella looked at her sister with relief. For once, Penda sounded supportive. She had never been interested in the business before, but maybe this was her chance to finally help. Zella gave her the lodge keys, the account passwords, and all the details about the upcoming bookings. "It's just for a short time," she said with a tired smile. "I'll be back before the holidays." Penda nodded, saying, "Of course, leave everything to me." During the first few days, Zella called often to check in. Penda sounded polite, giving short updates. "Everything's fine," she would say. "Don't worry, just rest." Zella tried to relax, trusting that her sister was taking care of things. But as weeks passed, Penda stopped answering calls as often. She always had excuses: poor network, too busy, or at the market. Zella didn't think much of it at first. After all, running a lodge wasn't easy. But deep down, something didn't feel right. Whenever she tried checking her business email, it wouldn't open. When she called one of her suppliers, he sounded confused, saying, "I thought your sister is the owner now." Zella brushed it off, thinking maybe he misunderstood. She told herself everything would be fine once she got back. As the days grew colder and Christmas drew near, Zella counted down the days to return to her mountain home. She didn't know that the person she trusted most was slowly taking it away from her. Piece by piece, days turned into weeks, and Zella's recovery felt longer than she ever imagined. Her leg was healing, but her heart was restless. Every morning, she tried calling Penda to check on the lodge. Most times, the calls went unanswered. When Penda finally picked up, her voice was rushed. "Everything's fine, Zella. Bookings are slow because of the weather, but don't worry. Just focus on getting better." Zella tried to believe her, even though something about her sister's calm tone didn't sit right. At first, she told herself Penda was probably overwhelmed. Running a lodge wasn't easy: guests, suppliers, staff. It took energy and planning. But as time went on, Zella noticed strange things. Her business email stopped working. Every time she tried logging in, it said, "Invalid account." She thought it was a mistake. She tried again and again, but still nothing. Then one morning, she opened her bank app to check the lodge account, and the app refused to open. Her password had been changed. Her chest tightened. She called the bank's customer service, but they told her the account was under review, and that only the registered business owner could make changes. That sentence hit her like ice. She was the owner. At least she thought she still was. Worried, she tried calling her manager at the lodge. No one answered. Then she tried one of her regular guests, a family from Dar es Salaam who always came for holidays. The line rang and rang, but no one picked up. She left a message, pretending to sound calm. "Hi, it's Zella, just checking if everything's okay at the lodge." No reply came. By the second month, Zella felt trapped, her body healing but her mind spinning with questions. She started having sleepless nights, wondering what was happening up in the mountains. Each unanswered call, each error message, made her stomach twist tighter. When she called Penda again, her sister sounded different, colder, almost irritated. "Zella, stop stressing. The lodge is fine. You think too much. Just rest," she said before hanging up. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Zella stared at her phone, her heart racing. She opened her photo gallery and looked at the pictures of her lodge. The cabins, the fireplace, the wooden benches she built herself. It was more than a business. It was her life's work. She felt an ache she couldn't explain, like something precious was slipping away quietly while she could only watch. When her doctor finally said she could travel again, Zella didn't wait a single day. She packed her bag, grabbed her crutches, and booked the earliest bus to the Highlands. Her heart pounded with hope and fear all at once. She didn't know what she would find when she got there, but deep down, she already knew it wouldn't be good. The cold wind hit Zella's face as she stepped off the bus, gripping her crutches tightly. Her heart raced with every breath as she made her way up the familiar path to her lodge. It had been months since she last saw it, and she imagined walking into quiet halls, maybe seeing her staff decorating for Christmas. But as she got closer, something felt strange. The road that once stood empty was now full of cars, shiny, expensive cars she had never seen before. Music floated through the air. Laughter, clinking glasses, and the warm glow of lights danced across the snow. Zella stopped, confused. Her heart began to pound. She moved closer, her crutches pressing into the cold ground. The entire lodge was glowing, every window bright, every tree wrapped with fairy lights. It looked like a grand celebration. Her heart fluttered with a small hope. Maybe Penda had planned a surprise party to welcome her back. Maybe, for once, her sister had done something kind. But when Zella reached the door, that hope shattered. The security guard at the entrance, someone she didn't even recognize, stepped forward. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said firmly. "This is a private event. Do you have an invitation?" Zella blinked, stunned. "Invitation? This is my property. I'm the owner." The man frowned, glancing at his clipboard. "Sorry, ma'am. The owner's name here is Mrs. Penda Cato." For a moment, Everything around her went silent. The cold bit deeper, and her fingers tightened on her crutches. Her voice trembled. Pendama. My sister. The guard nodded politely, not realizing the weight of what he had just said. Yes, she owns the lodge. Please step aside, ma'am. Guests are arriving. Zella's chest felt heavy. Through the glass windows, she could see the inside. The same wooden walls she had built with her own hands. The same fireplace where she once dreamed of greeting families. Now strangers filled her home. They laughed, drank, and took photos in front of her handmade furniture. And there, in the center of it all, stood Penda, wearing a bright red dress, a diamond necklace around her neck, holding a glass of champagne. Zella watched as Penda raised her glass high and said loudly, "To new beginnings, and to the proud owner of Kato Mountain Lodge." Everyone clapped and cheered. Zella felt her knees weaken. Her photographs hung on the walls, but her name was nowhere to be seen. It was as if she had been erased from her own story. The guard gave her a pitying look and said softly, "Ma'am, please, I can't let you in." Zella didn't argue. She took one last look at the house she built from scratch, now filled with people who didn't even know her name. Her heart ached, but her eyes stayed dry. She turned away slowly, whispering to herself, "It's not over." And as she walked down the snowy path, the laughter behind her faded. But inside her, something fierce had awakened. Zella stood outside the door for a long time, her heart pounding. She could hear laughter, music, and Penda's voice echoing through the hall. The same hall she had designed herself. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The warmth of the fire hit her face, but the room went completely silent. Every head turned toward her. Glasses froze midair. People looked at her like she was an uninvited guest. Penda was the first to react. Her smile faded for a second, then returned quickly. "Oh, you're early," she said in a cheerful voice that sounded fake. "I was going to call you after the holidays." Zella's eyes scanned the room, her furniture, her wall art, her decorations, all still there. Yet somehow it didn't feel like home anymore. Even her favorite family photo that once stood by the fireplace was gone. In its place was a large golden frame of Penda posing in front of the lodge sign. The sign that now read Penda Kato Mountain Lodge. Zella's voice trembled, but she forced herself to speak. "What is this, Penda? Why is my name gone from everything? What have you done?" The guests looked between them awkwardly, sensing tension. Penda laughed lightly, pretending nothing was wrong. "Don't make a scene, sister. I rebranded the lodge under my name. It's better for business. You know how people trust me more. I have better connections in the city." Zella stared at her in disbelief. "Rebranded? You took everything I built, my money, my hard work, and you're calling it rebranding?" Penda's tone turned sharp. "You should be thanking me. I saved your business. While you were lying in bed, I made this place shine. Do you see all these guests? They came because of me." Zella felt the eyes of everyone in the room watching. Her face burned with humiliation. She tried to stay calm, but her voice cracked. "And what about my accounts? My emails? My documents? Why can't I access anything?" Penda sighed dramatically. "Zella, you're overreacting. Everything is under control. Let's not ruin Christmas with your drama." Zella took a step back. Her body felt weak, but her mind was racing. She looked around again. Every sign of her presence had been erased. Her books, her handmade crafts, even her small photo frame, all gone. It was like she never existed here. The guests began whispering. Some looked guilty, others just confused. Zella realized she had nothing left to say. Fighting here, in front of strangers, wouldn't bring her dignity back. So she turned quietly and walked toward the door. Penda called after her. "Don't be so emotional, Zella. You'll thank me later." Zella didn't reply. As she stepped outside into the cold night, her breath formed small clouds in the air. Her heart hurt deeply, but her eyes were calm. She whispered to herself, "Let her enjoy it, for now." Because deep inside, Zella already knew. She wasn't walking away in defeat. She was walking away to plan her return. After that painful night, Zella disappeared quietly from the city. She didn't shout, she didn't post anything online, and she didn't tell anyone what her sister had done. People who knew her expected anger or tears, but Zella did something no one saw coming. She went silent. She rented a small room in town, kept her phone off most of the time, and began to rebuild her strength. both in her body and her mind. She knew Penda would expect her to fight publicly, but Zella wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Instead, she decided to gather the truth quietly, piece by piece. One by one, she reached out to the people who had helped her build the lodge. The carpenter who made her wooden chairs, the supplier who brought her food and drinks, the accountant who had helped with her tax papers. All of them were shocked to hear what had happened. They told her the same story, that Penda had come with official-looking papers, claiming Zella had handed everything over to her for health reasons. She had even presented documents stamped and signed, showing that the business now belonged to her. Zella felt sick as she listened. Penda had forged her signature and used her temporary silence as an opportunity to take everything. Still, Zella didn't react in anger. Instead, she asked careful questions, collected copies of every invoice and message, and took notes. Her accountant, an older man who had worked with her since the beginning, leaned forward one evening and said softly, "She may have taken the business name, Zella, but the land title, that's still under you. It cannot be changed without your approval. Remember that contract you signed with the land board? It has an anti-transfer clause. No lawyer can break it." That moment felt like a small light in a dark tunnel. Zella realized Penda had made one huge mistake. She had tried to steal something that wasn't hers legally. The land, the soil beneath the lodge, still belonged to Zella. That meant every cabin, every stone, every nail sitting on that land still tied back to her name. Zella smiled for the first time in weeks. She knew what she had to do next. Instead of arguing or exposing her sister, she began to prepare quietly. She gathered proof, verified signatures, and kept all her papers safe. She worked with a trusted lawyer who promised to help her handle things properly, but silently. Zella didn't want drama. She wanted truth. She stayed calm and patient, pretending to disappear while her sister celebrated. What Penda didn't know was that her victory was already slipping away, and Zella was waiting for the perfect moment to take back everything she had built. A month passed, and by then, Penda had fully settled into her fake life as the owner of Kato Mountain Lodge. She gave interviews to small magazines, posted pictures online with captions like, "Dreams do come true," and even hosted events for business investors. Everyone around her believed she had built the place herself. But while she enjoyed her fame, Zella was working quietly in the background, preparing something that would change everything. Zella had gathered every document she needed, copies of forged papers, her original land deed, the bank statements and witness statements from the builders and suppliers. Everything was ready. She just needed one perfect chance to bring the truth to light without shouting, without fighting, and without Penda seeing it coming. So she came up with a clever plan, one that would use Penda's own pride against her. One evening, Zella wrote a formal letter on elegant paper. It read, "You are cordially invited to a partnership meeting for the expansion of Kato Mountain Lodge." It didn't sign her name. The invitation looked professional, stamped with the logo of the Regional Tourism Board, which Zella's lawyer had already contacted in advance. The board had agreed to conduct an official audit of the lodge to verify ownership and land compliance, as part of their new tourism policy. To make sure Penda attended, Zella made sure the invitation promised potential investment partnerships and new funding opportunities. When the letter arrived, Penda was thrilled. She showed it off to her friends, bragging that investors wanted to expand her business. She bought a new red suit, gold earrings, and a matching handbag for the event. "Finally," she said to her friends, "people are starting to see my value." On the day of the meeting, she arrived at the district tourism office with her usual confidence. The officers welcomed her politely, guiding her to a room with a long table filled with documents and officials. She had no idea that Zella was already there, sitting quietly in a corner, dressed simply, her expression calm. Penda smiled and began handing out her fake ownership papers, explaining how she had developed the lodge from scratch. The officers listened carefully, nodding, taking notes. Then one of them asked for the original land documents. Penda proudly pulled out the forged deed, thinking it was enough to prove her story. That was the moment Zella stood up. Slowly, she walked to the front and placed a thick brown envelope on the table. "Here are the real documents," she said softly. The officials turned the papers around, comparing signatures and seals. Within minutes, the difference was clear. Penda's documents were fake. The lead officer looked up, frowning. Mrs. Pendicato, he said, these papers are illegal. This property belongs to Ms. Zellicato. You have no legal right to it. The room fell silent. Penda's face went pale. She realized too late. The invitation she had proudly accepted wasn't a partnership meeting. It was her own trap, set perfectly by the sister she had betrayed. The meeting room was filled with quiet tension as the officials went through the thick stack of papers spread across the long wooden table. Penda sat confidently at the front, crossing her legs and flashing her usual proud smile. She had rehearsed her speech the night before, convinced this was her moment to shine in front of investors and government officers. When one of the officials asked for proof of ownership, she quickly reached into her designer bag and handed over a glossy folder filled with the fake documents she had carefully forged weeks earlier. This is the original ownership deed, she said proudly, her voice echoing slightly in the room. The officers nodded and began flipping through the pages, marking a few points with their pens. Penda leaned back in her chair, feeling victorious. In her mind, this was just a formality. She thought she had outsmarted everyone, including her sister. But then, quietly, someone stood up from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see Zella, dressed neatly but simply, holding a brown envelope close to her chest. Without saying a word, she walked forward and placed it gently on the table. The room grew still. Penda's smile faded, her fingers tightening around her handbag. The lead officer glanced at Zella, then at the envelope. "What is this?" he asked. "The original land deed," Zella replied softly, "with the authentic signatures, government seals, and tax receipts. The land has never been transferred." The officer carefully opened the envelope, pulling out the neatly arranged papers. He compared the signatures, one by one, with the documents Penda had submitted. Within seconds, the differences were clear. The forged papers had uneven stamps, mismatched serial numbers, and even a wrong date on the final page. The officers began whispering among themselves, passing the documents down the table for verification. One of them finally looked up and said, "These are not the same signatures. The official record shows this land still belongs to Zellicato." Penda's eyes widened. "That's impossible," she blurted out, standing halfway from her seat. I bought it. I made the payments." Her voice shook as she tried to defend herself, but the officials weren't convinced. They called in a legal auditor, who confirmed everything within minutes. The lead officer closed the files and looked directly at her. His tone was calm but firm. "Mrs. Pendicato, you have committed property fraud. This land has never belonged to you. You are under investigation for document forgery and illegal transfer of ownership." The room went completely silent. Everyone watched as Penda's face turned pale. Her confident smile disappeared. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at Zella, who stood quietly, not angry, just calm and unshaken. For the first time in her life, Penda had no excuse, no lies to hide behind. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The truth had spoken louder than anything she could ever say. Within hours of the meeting, whispers began to spread across the region. Word of the fraud reached hotel owners, travel agents, and tourism officers faster than any online post could. By the next morning, everyone in the local tourism network knew that Penda had forged ownership papers to steal her sister's lodge. The story became the main topic of discussion in every cafe, office, and driver's waiting line. People who once admired Penda now spoke her name with disappointment. Soon, guests who had booked expensive Christmas stays at the lodge began calling nonstop, demanding refunds. They said they wanted nothing to do with a property involved in fraud. Some even posted reviews warning others not to visit. Within 2 days, all upcoming bookings were canceled. The once busy lodge that used to sparkle with guests and music now stood almost empty, its parking lot quiet and cold. Penda tried to fight back. She made a few desperate calls to her investors, but none of them answered. When she visited the bank, she was told her accounts were frozen for investigation. The manager politely handed her a letter from the tourism board stating that the property had been legally returned to its rightful owner, Zellicato. Penda's face fell. Everything she had stolen, every bit of luxury she had flaunted, disappeared in just a few days. Meanwhile, Zella didn't celebrate publicly. She returned to the mountain quietly, walking slowly up the familiar path that once felt like home. The wind felt different that day, softer, calmer, like it was welcoming her back. When she reached the front door, she paused for a moment, touching the old wooden handle. It was hers again. Instead of reopening it under the old name, Zella decided to start fresh. She changed the signboard to read The Refuge Lodge. She said it represented a place of peace, not just for guests but for herself. The name carried meaning, a reminder that peace could rise even after betrayal. Zella rehired her old staff, the cleaners, cooks, and guides who had stayed loyal to her even when she was gone. Many of them cried when they saw her return. She hugged them one by one and said softly, "Thank you for believing in me." She paid them bonuses from her personal savings and promised better working conditions. Slowly, the laughter returned to the lodge. Within a few weeks, bookings began to rise again. Guests who had heard about Zella's honesty and strength wanted to stay at her place. The lodge became known not just for its beauty but for its story, a symbol of truth triumphing over greed. As the snow settled around the mountain, Zella stood at the balcony, watching the sunrise. For the first time in a long while she felt calm. She had lost everything once, but she had rebuilt it with integrity. And this time it was untouchable. Months passed, and the lodge came back to life in the most beautiful way. The air was filled with laughter again. Families roasting marshmallows by the fire pit, children building snowmen in the open field, and travelers sipping warm tea on the porch as the sun painted the mountains gold. Zella stood quietly near the entrance, wrapped in her thick shawl, watching everything she had rebuilt bloom with joy and peace. Her old friend Embo, the tour guide who had been with her since the early days, walked up beside her. He looked at the happy faces, then turned to her with a serious expression. "Zella," he said gently, "why didn't you press charges against your sister? You had every right to. You could have ruined her completely." Zella smiled faintly and shook her head. "No," she said softly. "Sometimes losing everything teaches people more than prison ever could." Her voice carried no anger, only peace. She had realized that true victory didn't come from revenge. It came from knowing that she had rebuilt herself without hate. Weeks later, as she checked the mail one chilly morning, she found a small envelope addressed in familiar handwriting. It was from Penda. The paper looked worn, the writing shaky and uneven. Zella hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside, the letter read, "You were right. Owning things means nothing if you lose yourself. I thought I was winning, but I lost everything, especially you. I hope one day you'll forgive me." Zella read it slowly, her eyes soft but unreadable. She didn't cry nor did she smile. She simply folded the letter neatly and walked to the lodge's front desk. She opened the guest book, the same one where travelers wrote their memories, and placed the letter between its pages. It belonged there, among stories of people who had come seeking peace. That night, as the firelight glowed warmly through the windows, Zella stepped outside. The snow crunched gently under her boots. She looked up at the sky, the same stars she had once wished upon when her dreams seemed impossible. This time, she didn't wish for anything. She had everything she needed. Behind her, laughter filled the air again, pure and free. She smiled quietly, knowing her boundaries were now strong, her heart steady, and her soul at rest. It wasn't revenge that healed her. It wasn't even justice. It was peace. A peace that came from walking away, from choosing to live without bitterness. And in that calm, silent night, Zella finally felt what she had worked for all along, freedom.